Great, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jenny Cudward. I work at Dakota County in Apple Valley, but I'm here with you from this forest. No, just kidding. It's way better than my house though. And we also have Kirsten Wahlberg helping us out. We're both in the Environmental Resources Department at Dakota County. Kirsten will be handling all of the facilitation in the background so that I can concentrate on getting you information. First, I'm going to do a little intro to Zoom in case you've never used it and as just a reminder. So Kirsten, if you would play that slide for me.
Going to share my screen.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. So we have muted you. You can unmute yourself. Sometimes you do that accidentally. It happens. I get it. So we might mute you again, but just keep in mind if you unmute yourself to mute yourself back. We have over 100 people registered for the class. I don't think we'll have all of those people joining us, but even if we have 50 people, which looks like we're getting to, that's still very distracting if we unmute ourselves. Limit your own distractions. So pretend you came to a library or a classroom and you're here eager to learn. So try to really be in that mind of all in the presentation and really get as much out as you can. And then interaction, since of course we're not in a room together, there are several ways that we can interact. So one, you can unmute yourself if you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself just because you don't want to draw attention to yourself. I get that. There's a few silent ways, nonverbal ways to interact. You should see on the lower part of your Zoom monitor, you should be able to see mute and the video. That's where you turn your mute, your voice, or your video on and off. And then on next to those icons, you should see participants and chats. So the chat is, you can click on that chat and that you can type in questions there, and that's where Kirsten will be monitoring all of the questions, and she'll ask me when it's the appropriate time for those kinds of questions. You can also, if you click on participants, you'll get to everyone who's on the meeting, but you'll also see this on our screen right now. You can see icons for raise hand, yes, no, go slower, go faster. I guarantee you will not be using go faster. And then some other interactions. So we probably won't be using most of them tonight, but you can always click on raise your hand. And that means, teacher, call on me. And then Kirsten can unmute you and you can ask your question that way. So if you don't want to just straight up interrupt. So those are the ways you can interact. And if you have any questions, even just how to use Zoom or you're not finding something, type it in that chat box and we'll help you out. Okay. Now, before we go to the presentation, I wanted to take a little poll from all of you. So we are going to try that out. It's our first poll in one of these. So you should see on your screen a box that popped up that said, how comfortable are you with composting? No knowledge, never done it, clean slate. Some knowledge, but you've never done it. You've composted in the past, but it didn't really work out. You're composting now, but it could be better. You're comfortable with composting, but always want to know more. Or you are an expert and could be teaching this class. So click on the right one and hit submit. We'll just give you another minute. While you're doing that, I'll just tell you, like I said, my name is Jenny, and I have been working in the waste and recycling field for many years. I like to say I've been talking trash professionally for 14 years, and I do really love it. Everything that we consume or throw away really tells us a lot about ourselves and our society, our culture, and how we deal with trash also tells a lot about who we are. So instead of, I'm so glad you're here because you realize that you don't want to throw everything in the garbage. You know that there's a better use for it, and I really appreciate that. Okay, I think that gives enough time. I'm trying to stall so you can do your vote.
Looks like a few more are coming in right now.
Okay. I'll continue to talk. We also have next month, we're going to be focusing on preventing food waste. So you can always check back with us and see what classes that we're hosting. That's on our website or on our Facebook. You can, Dakota County's Facebook site. And anything from just general save the food, want to know what you can do, to specific storage, how to store and preserve your food, meal planning. So we have at least 4 classes that we're offering, and more details will be out next week. Okay, Kirsten, how are we doing?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay, I'll end polling. Should I share the results or should I wait?
Aren't we all eager? I want to see.
All right, here we go.
Ooh, okay, good. Okay, no one's an expert. You can admit it, it's okay. Great, so we have the biggest one is some knowledge, never done it. Okay, that's what I expected. And then some general ones, no knowledge, never done it. Great, this is good. This is a good spread. So I'll talk to all of you. Thank you, Kirsten, and we are ready for the presentation.
All right, we already have a question. Okay. Is there a way we can get notes or the slides?
Yes. So we are recording right now, and we'll be sending anyone who registered for the class, we'll be sending you the recording of the class. You can watch it on YouTube. And then I'm going to be attaching some great handouts in case that's a better way for you to learn. All right, let's get to it. I titled this presentation when I made it many years ago, The Lazy Guide to Composting, because I really wanted to just bring it down. Composting can seem intimidating. People are talking about chemistry, nitrogen, oxygen, whatever. I really wanted to bring it down. The great thing about composting is it's going to happen whether you want it to or not, because it's natural. It's completely natural. It's just we're speeding up that process to make it happen faster and in a controlled environment. And one good thing about composting is, I think you can go to the next slide, Kirsten, so composting is great because normally this is the food waste. It's mostly food waste and other organic material. And when I say organic, I don't mean free of chemicals, organic milk kind of way. I mean everything that's made out of carbon and nitrogen. Anything made out of carbon is organic material and will decompose. So normally we would probably throw your food scraps away and they would be hauled off to the landfill. That's where most of our trash goes in Dakota County. Dakota County is the only county in the metro that is home to not 1, but 2 landfills that are for municipal waste, so all of our general trash. So all general trash just comes into Dakota County if it's going to a landfill. So we are home to them. And our landfills only have so much space, so they will fill up. And what will we do? The thing about sending stuff to the landfill too is normally people usually say like, well, I'm not going to compost because if I send my food waste to the landfill, it's going to decompose anyways. And it does, but it decomposes a lot differently than it does in our backyards. So at a landfill, when we put our food waste in a landfill, it's smushed down, compacted as much as possible. They literally have 10-ton trucks driving over all day. They drive over the landfill to smush things down. That's their only job, is to smush. And what they do is they make an anaerobic environment, which means no oxygen. And when you have an anaerobic environment, the bacteria that eat away at our waste in an anaerobic environment, they produce methane. And that's just what happens. So methane is then released from the landfills, and it's one of the leading causes of global warming, of climate change. Now, luckily in Minnesota, it's mandatory that all landfills have a methane capture system. So they try to catch all of those gases. We're lucky to have that law in Minnesota, and we can capture that methane and use it for energy, but a lot of states don't. So all of that amazing, great resource is turning into greenhouse gases and then not doing us any good. Instead, we can compost it, and composting is that same action, but in an oxygen-rich environment. So now those oxygen-loving bugs are decomposing, and they turn our food scraps into this amazing compost, which isn't soil, but it looks like soil, as you can see in the picture. It smells earthy, it smells like soil, it's very rich and dense. But really what it is a soil additive. It's all the nutrients that our plants need to absorb and to grow. Next slide. And here's another why compost. So like I said, it provides nutrients for our soils. So composting is a free way to get fertilizer for your yard. And I talked about going to the landfill. Well, this is actually, these bar graphs show you what we throw away every year in Minnesota. So this is a study done by the Pollution Control Agency, and the last time they did it was 2013. And they dug through our trash. They literally dug through our trash as a sample and put things into piles and weighed those piles. And so this is the summary of it. So a third of all of our stuff that we send to the dump could be composted. A third. And the smelliest part of our trash is that third. So if you take out the smelly parts and compost them, you actually don't need to take out your trash as much either, because it's less trash and it doesn't smell. Next slide. There's two main types of composting. There's outdoor, backyard composting. That's what I consider composting. That's what we're going to talk about mostly tonight. Backyard composting, you don't have to do it in your backyard, but it's just the differential of it's at your home composting, but it's not inside. So backyard composting. And then there's indoor composting with worms. And we're not going to talk about that as much tonight. I can certainly answer questions at the end of this. I've done worm composting. I don't have worm composting with me right now. I haven't done it in a few years, but I can definitely talk about different methods for that. If there is a lot of interest, we could have a whole Zoom webinar just on worm composting. It's a lot of fun. You pretty much keep worms as pets and feed them your food scraps. That's the basic way to put it. And they're a lot of fun. We'll go to the next slide. Let me know if there's questions too, Kirsten. Okay, so backyard composting, what is it? It's a really simple recipe. If you like to cook, or you just are a kind of a linear thinker, like checking off everything that you need, this is a great way to think about it. So compost happens naturally. I love it because you can be lazy. You don't have to baby it, but you do need to put the right stuff in it to make it happen faster. You need a habitat, and we're going to talk about what that means. That's all it means, is a location, a bin. You need the stuff to mix together to make the compost, and we're going to talk about that. Water, the amazing thing about Minnesota is you don't need to add any water because it comes from the sky. Air, and that's what we'll talk about. Turning your compost, do you need to turn it? How much do you turn it? And then that's it. In nature makes this happen already. So if you walk through a forest, you're not walking on 10 feet of leaves, because nature decomposes all of that debris, that detritus, and makes nutrients for the next generation of trees. Slide. All right, finding a site. So this is the barrier that people kind of stop at. That's the first barrier. Like, I don't even know where to put it. I'm not going to do it. I can't do this. So it's really easy. And we're going to talk about bins in a second, but no matter what kind of structure that you have, find a place in your yard where it's easily accessible. Think about where you would want to haul out your food scraps in January. So you might find if you have a huge yard, you might love that it's tucked away way back there by a bush, and that's a great spot, but there's no way you're going to shovel a route to it in the winter. And maybe that's fine if you don't want to compost in the winter, but if you do, think about that first. So find an area that you know you can access. It's not too close to the house, because if you do have some rodents that come by, you don't want them too close to the house. You want to be cautious of your city rules and neighbors. And I mean this as, if your city has any rules about composting, two of them might be, and I don't know your city rules, I did not look up all of your city rules, but if you ask, I can definitely do that for you. The main two rules that I've ever seen in city rules are make sure it's 1 or 2 feet away from your property boundary, and that's just being a good neighbor, so you're not right on the line, and that it's enclosed or that you can't see it from the street. And that's just more beautification types of things. I would love to see my neighbor's compost, but maybe other people don't want that. And then neighbors, if you do, for instance, my compost site is about a foot away from the fence I share with my neighbor. Before I put my compost bin in, I did ask him like, hey, Chuck, do you mind if I put a compost right here? Because, you know, you can see it, you can, do you have any problems with it? And of course he didn't, he's an avid gardener, but just those conversations. And they might even ask like, what is compost? What do you do? How do I get in that? And you might even want to share the compost bin. Just check with your neighbors. If it's nowhere near your neighbors, you don't have to ask them, but it's always a nice thing to do and to brag about your new cool compost bin. Slightly protected, and this is more, it doesn't have to be protected, but you know, if you had a huge windstorm, you don't want it flying around. Access to water, this isn't as big of an issue here too. Anytime I talk about water, I grew up and I'm from Colorado and there's no water there. So you had to water your compost if you wanted it to get going. Here, there is no issue with that. So you don't really have to have access to water. You also don't want it to be right under a drain spout or somewhere where it's getting flooded, because as soon as it fills up with water or it's too damp, then you start that anaerobic process, which we talked about at the landfill, and it's gonna smell a lot. So protected. And then well-drained soil. There are a lot of compost bins that we'll talk about that actually don't touch the ground. They're tumblers, they're balls, they're different kinds. I prefer the ones that have access to the ground. One, because you don't have to empty it as much because it's kind of just sinking into the ground slowly. And you get some of those natural microbes that are coming up from the soil. You don't have to have that kind of bin, but it's nice to have access to it. I've had people ask me like, I hardly have any lawn. Can I put it on like the cement slab? Like, yeah, just you'll have to maintain it a little more and check on it more, but totally. Next slide. Any questions for that one, Kirsten?
Well, one question was about whether or not bins get stinky when you start adding food scraps.
Yes, we'll definitely talk about that. Compost should never smell. And if it smells, that means something's wrong. And we'll talk about what that means.
All right. And then one question is from somebody who lives in a senior building. Can the CDA forbid composting on the property? We do have a garden.
Yes, so CDAs and homeowners associations could have rules that say you're not allowed to compost. And I hate this because it's so restricting. One thing you could do is get on that board of your HOA and change rules. But sadly, a CDA especially is more governmental and it's very hard to change. That doesn't mean it's definitely that way. It's just they might have a rule and you'll need to work with it.
All right. That's it.
Okay. Speaking of bins, so here are the main types of bins. And I happen to have the one that looks like the basic bin. And it's kind of the classic just black bin. You'll always see them black. One, because they're usually made out of recycled plastic, which is really cool. And they absorb some of the solar heat that happens. Anything black, of course, outside absorbs more heat, and it helps the process going. So you usually see them in black for good reasons, or dark colors. Basic bins are open at the bottom, and so some microbes can come up and soil can go down, and they're usually in slats. Every slat that you see is in kind of a perforated plastic, and air can get in and out. And then the top of the bin opens like a little door, and that's where you throw your stuff in. A roller, which is not as common, but I have known a few people. It is basically a ball that you have a locking lid and you throw stuff in. I've heard this is great if you have rambunctious kids and you need them to go play and go toss your compost around, because you need the rolling is the mechanism to turn it and to have air. With the basic bin, we'll talk about turning, whether you want to turn or not. With the basic bin, it is harder to like kind of move things around because it's a stationary bin. The roller is definitely meant to roll. The tumbler is the other more common one where it's either one whole bin or it's split down the middle where there's two doors, two sliding doors. And you put your stuff in and there's actually like there's a knob on the side of it where you can turn it, a lever, and you physically turn it that way. And they're great. I know friends that use them and love them. For the roller and the tumbler, the only restrictions that I see, the cons, are you can only fill them about halfway because, of course, you're going to have to empty it. It needs room to tumble. You can't fill it all the way up and then expect it to work. But I've heard it gets through the compost a lot faster. So at least you're kind of emptying it out more, as opposed to the basic bin where, you know, it might take a year or so to fill up and you're okay with that because you don't want to do anything with it. And it just slowly decreases over time. Those are kind of the pros and cons to each. And you can, with this, ask some questions about bins if you have them right now. I will continue to say, you can buy them new. You can usually during the springtime get them at Home Depot or Lowe's, Menards. I happened to, when I moved into a place that finally had a yard, I went on Craigslist and I just looked up to see compost bins. And there's always a few on Craigslist where people, I bought my bin off of Craigslist from someone in Lakeville, and they were getting rid of it because they moved to a place that was a homeowners association and they didn't allow composting, which was very sad for her. Great for me because I got a compost bin, and it's used, so double bonus. And we're about to talk about building your own bin too, but any questions about these bins, Kirsten?
Yes, good question from Lisa. She says, if you're adding new stuff into a tumbler, for instance, how is it ever done and ready to empty?
Exactly. So if you're getting a tumbler, I would suggest getting a 2-door tumbler. So you, and I mean, there's a slat in the middle where it separates both compartments. So then one side you can add things to and let it sit and do its thing and compost. And then the other side you're adding new stuff to. And then you keep kind of reversing that over and over. Or you fill it up if you don't have two compartments. You fill it all halfway up. Then you're done for a while. Maybe you have 2 tumblers, maybe you have 2 different compost bins. You'll let everything compost in one tumbler and then empty it out and kind of rotate that way. Yeah, that's one of the other kind of cons to them, but it does happen faster.
Wow, cool.
Any other questions about bins?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide and talk about, I don't want to buy a bin, let me build my own. And I've done some of these too. So that is totally fine. Here's some pros and cons about building your own bin. If you do a chicken wire thing like this, which is basically stakes and some chicken wire, very easy.
Oh, yeah, cartwheels coming on.
Oh, can you mute people, Kirsten, for me?
Yep.
Thank you.
Huh?
For the chicken wire bin, I wouldn't recommend using this method for food. And if you do, you're going to have to bury the food right in the middle, but no food should be exposed to any of the outside because that will attract all the rodents. So that's great though for leaves. If you just want to mulch or compost your leaves, chicken wire is the best because it happens really fast and it's really easy to set up and very cheap too. The wood or pallets one, and this is actually, it's a beautiful one that you can actually buy a kit for, but if you just want to DIY, get 4 pallets and start your own, you can definitely do that. And I mean pallets like shipping pallets that come with big shipping containers. So you can do that. You can build your own, staple it in, nail it together, and that works just fine. What I recommend though, if you're ever using wood, never use treated wood. And if you don't know where the pallet's been or you're not quite sure it's treated, then I wouldn't use it. Because whatever happens if you're using treated wood, any of those chemicals will absorb back into the compost. And if you're using your compost for any food growing, you don't want to use the compost if there's chemicals in it. And then the multi-wood bin, I've made this one before, I'm very proud to say, when I used to be a part of a community garden. And so we had 12 different plots that people had. So we needed a bigger compost system. And it's actually very easy to make with a few other people. And it's, you get all your wood cut, all of the front slats that you see actually can be slid out. And the whole point is you start at one end, you add what you need to add. And then as it's, halfway or partial way full, you move to the next installment, the next enclosure, and add to that one. And then when that's full, you come to the last one. So you kind of create a process where, You don't really do much with the first one as you're working on number 2 and number 3. By the time you're done with 3, you can move back and empty the first one out. So it's an amazing process. It's just a lot more space. So if you're limited on space, you definitely can't do this. And if you just don't have as much stuff, you wouldn't want this one. This is great for a community garden or someone that does a lot of yard work. I did have a question that came in before that was emailed to me, and someone asked about just they don't want to buy anything. Can they just kind of make a pile, or what can they do? Most city ordinances require you to have some kind of enclosure to avoid any rodents, wildlife coming around, whether that's based on anything or not. It doesn't matter. It's your city ordinance. So you do need some kind of enclosure, but it could be as easy as pallets or some kind of chicken wire. And it does kind of keep it together. Hopefully that answered your question, but if it didn't, please let me know and we'll go over it more. Any questions about bins?
I was just going to share what I do real quick.
Yes, please.
That's okay. So we looked up on Facebook Marketplace just for free pallets, because there's always people trying to get rid of pallets. And so we set up the pallet method, but we literally just have 3 things nailed together and it works really great.
Yeah.
So that's what we have.
Free.
We have a question from Sally. If people stop throwing organic waste in their trash, will the landfills have trouble breaking down the waste?
No, because we have a lot of other stuff. And actually a landfill doesn't want things to break down. That's why they smush it so much. They want things to stay stable. In fact, you can actually find newspapers from 30, 40 years ago and still read them because things don't decompose as much. Another fun, scary fact, a head of lettuce that might have taken 3 months to decompose, a whole head of lettuce that would take 3 months to decompose in your compost, would take 5 years in a landfill. So it's not the same and it takes a lot longer. So taking away food waste from our landfills, they actually would love that, landfill operators, because methane and the liquid from our food is what they have to regulate the most. So they don't want that stuff in our landfills, but they have to deal with it.
Great. One question about how long the general composting takes. I'm guessing you're going to talk about that.
That's right. I have a little slide on it.
Excellent. And then there was one more question. Do you have any experience with sub pods?
Are those the kind of septic kind of systems where that are kind of buried?
Yeah,
Imagine
I
that's what
think
you mean.
so. Yep.
Yes, I don't have direct experience. Actually, when we bought this house, it has one in it, but I'm afraid to use it because we need to unbury it and move it. They're usually sold more as for dog poop. So one way for dog poop that you can get rid of, because we're going to talk about it, there should be no animal or human feces in your compost at all. So for dog poop, you can buy these big bins that you bury in your backyard, and it's kind of like a mini septic system. You add some microbes, and it's eating the dog poop and turning it into compost back into your soil. And then I think you're supposed to move it every few years or so to just rotate. But so I don't have any direct experience, but I've heard good things.
Excellent. We just have quite a few comments about people getting their compost bins through Dakota County.
Yay! So we do have, I think we're sold out now, but every spring there is an annual compost bin sale through the Recycling Association of Minnesota, and we discount it by 30% for Dakota County residents. So I'm so glad if you got your bin that way. Yay!
All right, and that's it.
Okay. And you can still ask bin questions as we go. It's just, I wanted to take them there too. Okay, the big question, what on earth can I put in my new compost bin or my new compost pile? You might have heard a lot of things about like browns and greens and carbons and nitrogens. And all that really means is you have to have a balance of wet and dry things. So I don't like to use the carbon and nitrogen because it overwhelms people, and I don't want to start getting organic chemistry on you because then you'll definitely tune out. So really everything that's organic or everything that's that is grown in nature and comes from a plant or a tree, or sorry, a plant or an animal, is made up of carbon and nitrogen. So if you, it's more of the stages in the life cycle of when you want it. For instance, all of the paper that you, or all of the yard waste that you have, your grass clippings, your leaves, your branches, it all counts as a nitrogen too, but you let it dry out and that nitrogen leaves, and then you're left with the carbon browns. The carbon is left, and that's what you're using for your compost. So that's why it gets a little confusing of carbon and nitrogen, browns and greens. I like using browns and greens because it's more illustrative of kind of the stage of decomposition that you want. So if it's brown, that's probably because it's dry, and that's exactly what you want to use as your carbon source. If it's green, it's going to be full of nitrogen, it's wet and heavy. Those are your greens. So what does that mean? We'll go to the next slide, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions of what these are. And I have a whole slide of like, just lay it on me. Yes, no's. What is a brown? So the browns are actually the kind of limiting factor for a lot of people, where we're going to talk about greens in a second. Greens are easy. Greens, all of your kitchen waste, all of your, almost all your kitchen waste, your fruits and vegetable peelings, all of that are your greens. It's easy to come by, and you're constantly coming by it. The browns might be harder because you do have to have a ratio of 3-to-1. Now there is, if you are like a compost expert, scientist kind of, like, you have to have the exact right ratios. I have never in my life weighed anything for my compost bin, and you don't have to. What I like to think about it is, if I have like a little bucket, and we'll talk about how to collect compost or scraps in your kitchen. If I have that and I'm pouring it into my compost, I need 3 giant handfuls of leaves or other browns. That's how I handle it, as the 1-to-3 ratio. You just, hopefully that helps you think about it. So then if you're adding a 3-to-1, you need a lot more browns to your greens. So how do you get all those browns? Fallen leaves are kind of the gold, the money of composting. If you don't have a tree, or you don't have a lot of leaves that fall on your tree, I bet someone on your block does. You can definitely go talk to your neighbors. And I bet they would love for you to bag up some of their compost or their leaves. What I do is, I'll show you a picture of my bin in a second, but I have several maple trees, lucky me, and I try to gather as many leaves as I can in the fall, and that's what I use throughout the winter. Like, I'm just running out of my leaves for my compost bin now. So you kind of like have a storage in the winter. For the summer, when I don't have as many leaves, for gardening, because I love to garden. I don't have a huge garden, but I love to garden. I usually buy a bale of straw, and that's what I use to put down in between my plants as a weed barrier. Well, I only use maybe half of the bale of straw. So I use the other half for the rest of the summer as my browns. That's a really easy way to do it if you don't want to think about it. You can use spent plants, but they only count as browns if they're dried out. And we'll talk about no's, but don't use any spent, and I say spent plants, I mean dead plants. Don't use any dead plants that have seeds on them. And we'll talk about why in a second. You can use nutshells, pine cones. If you have a lot of pine cones in your yard, great. Hay straw, wood chips are fine. Make sure any wood chips or sawdust is untreated. Because as you can imagine, if you're using treated wood, wood chips or sawdust, any of those chemicals in the treated or painted wood would end up in your compost pile, and that does not break down. And then I say non-recyclable paper and cardboard because I would rather you put your newspaper and cardboard in the recycling. It'll make a bigger difference in our waste world if you can recycle that first. It'll have a longer life. But for non-recyclable things, we used to say you could put like your confidential shredded paper in your compost. I'm not saying that as much anymore. Sadly, we have been finding out that a lot of toners, so think of, if you get something printed from your bank or from your office, it's printed on a toner printer. And we're finding toners actually might have some bits of plastic in them for some reason. I don't know why they have to use plastic, but so there might be some microplastic in your ink on your paper, which is very distressing. So until we know more, we're just saying no more of that. If you want to use newspaper, although I'd rather it go in your recycling, but you can shred your newspaper. Newspaper all uses soy-based ink and it's fine to use. I'll go through greens and then I'll ask for questions.
Okay, sounds good. We got lots of questions coming.
I bet. Okay, greens. Greens, it's all that heavy, wet stuff from your kitchen. All food except bones, meat, and cheese, and we'll talk about that as a no. So fruits and veggies scraps, coffee grounds and filters are okay. Tea leaves and tea bags. More and more, we're also discovering tea bags might have plastic in them. So I've been not composting my tea bags anymore. Oh, it's just everywhere. And then I say green yard plants because if it was brown or freshly cut yard plants or trimmings from your house plants, if it's green, it has a lot of nitrogen still, so it counts as a green. If you let it dry out or if they're dried leaves already, then it would count as a brown. So I'm going to go through the no's and then, because that might clear up some questions too. So we'll go to the next slide. Oh no, okay, I'm going to just do this. So this is my opportunity. What about, all right, lay it on me, Kirsten. What's the list?
All right. You might have talked about this already. Fish, skin, and bones.
Yes, so you can't compost any fish skin or bones. Fish, I imagine like chicken skin or fish scales and bones. Nope, none of that. And we'll talk about, well, I can just tell you, it attracts rodents more. So there's that. And it can have bacteria more, and that bacteria won't break down. And then meat and bones, it's more of a complex carbon. So it takes a lot more heat and time to break down, and our backyard composters just won't do it. But I will talk about how you can get rid of them in a little bit.
Great. There's a question about one of the earlier slides. Somebody saw stew under browns. Was there something that said stew?
Could have said straw. Did I type it wrong?
That's what I was wondering too. Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you talk about fruit peels, orange
Yep.
citrus peels?
All of that is fine. Yep.
Great. Somebody's asking for clarification. 3-to-1 is confusing as leaves are less dense than food. Could you explain further, assuming it's weight equivalent?
Yeah, and it's really not, honestly. I mean, it could be a weight equivalent, but it's more of a volume. That's why I don't go by 3-to-1 a lot. I like to say just if you have your kitchen pail of your food scraps or just kind of this amount, if you can see my hands, like that amount, like a pail version, a pail amount, and you dump that in. I just take 3 giant handfuls of leaves. That's fine. It's really that you want to surround the food with dry stuff so that it's protected from rodents and other bugs that you might not want to be in there. It keeps the smell down, and it has a good layer. There needs to be more browns than wet greens.
Yes, absolutely. Does it only have to be uncooked food to put in?
Nope. It can be some cooked food. I've done my leftovers before. The thing that you would have to worry about is, no leftovers with meat in it. And then if there's a lot of oil is fine. It doesn't contaminate your compost, but it might attract more rodents, and you just might have problems that way.
Excellent. Pizza boxes?
Yeah, pizza boxes are okay. Any thick paper like that, it'll just take longer to break down. So if you're going to put a pizza box in, I wouldn't put it in whole. Same with, actually, I didn't mention this, any melons or rinds. Again, I'm a lazy composter, I'll admit it, and I'm okay with that. So I will just throw like whole rinds in there and it'll be fine. It will take a long time for that to decompose in my compost bin. So the smaller you can get things, the faster it'll compost. I know people, this is not me by any means, I know people that actually like blend up some of their food waste and then put it in. I'm not doing that. Just break it up as much as you can, and that should be good.
Definitely. Tissues?
Yep. Tissues, definitely. So you can throw in tissues, they're perfectly fine. I do that in my backyard compost. And then I didn't mention it, and maybe someone has asked, but here's a toilet paper roll. You can put these in your recycling too, but it's not high grade paper. So you can put your toilet paper or paper towel rolls into your compost. I would rip it up. I usually rip them up a little bit just to make it compost a little faster. You don't have to.
Excellent. Onions?
Yeah, they're fine. Onions are fine. Yeah.
Somebody's asking, why in the world would there be plastic in tea bags?
Amen.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, that's just disturbing.
it is. And it's used as an adhesive sometimes. It's used as the woven part. I don't know, but check your tea bags. Call the companies to ask.
Yes. Question, how many times a year can we expect to get compost in Minnesota weather?
I'll answer that in the timeline one.
And then somebody's asking for a laundry list of yes, no items, and I said that we would send that along afterwards.
And it isn't a laundry list. It's some of the basics too, but it has the big things in it. So we will send a list out.
Yep. I cut my kid's hair. Can that go in?
Definitely. I have pets too, and I put all their fur in there to the disgust of my husband. Yes. Yep, it's all organic. It's perfectly fine to put in. Yep, throw it in.
And that would be a brown?
That would be, yeah, probably a brown.
Okay, cool. Eggshells.
I was waiting. I have the picture of the eggs and I was waiting for eggshells. Yes, now eggshells are actually a mineral substance. It's not necessarily carbon that's going to break down, but they're great to add to your soil. So what I do is I usually, as I'm adding eggshells into my compost bucket, I kind of crumple them up just to kind of, they're also very bulky. So crumple them up, put them in, they'll break down more, but that calcium and other minerals will be added to your soil and be good for your plants.
All right, I think that's it for now.
Woo, okay. I think the no's are next. Okay, so here are the nevers and the sometimes. And we mentioned some of them. So never put bones or meat into your compost pile. Again, our compost piles don't get hot enough to kill the bacteria and break down the bones. And then you'll have rodents and it'll smell. Fats, and you can put a little bit, you know, if you have leftovers and there's a little bit of oil in your food, it's okay. But if you have like your giant, you know, fat jar that you've been saving from your bacon frying, don't put that in. One, it's like meats where it's harder to break down and it'll take a long time and it'll attract rodents. Please don't ever put any kind of feces in your compost. Again, it's bacteria. That bacteria won't break down in your compost and it will smell. You have to have a pretty big industrial system to allow for any kind of waste, human or pet waste. Chemically treated wood we talked about because we don't want those chemicals in our beautiful compost. Coal or charcoal ash, so don't empty your fire pit out in it. And that's really because it's already broken down. You're not adding a lot to your compost, and it might inhibit some bacteria from doing their job. Any inorganic things, and I say inorganic because they're not made of carbon so much. They're plastic, glass, and metal. They won't break down, or it'll take a very long time. You'll see that metal can in your compost for 20 years. Any weeds or any plants that have gone to seed. So I get this question a lot right now because dandelions are already starting to come out. I can't believe it. When I gather my weeds, when I weed my yard right now, nothing's really gone to seed yet, so I'll throw all of that in. But around late May, early June, when things start seeding, I'll put all of that in my yard waste, which is picked up, because that'll go to someplace where a compost site where it'll get hot enough, long enough, and those seeds will die. Infected plants, because that infection won't die, that disease and bacteria won't die in your compost. So then wherever you put your compost, you will have that infection again, or you might. Black walnut leaves, I've never had the privilege of having a black walnut tree, but if you have, it has an amazing ability. It kills everything around it as kind of a defense mechanism, which means if you put any black walnut leaves or black walnuts in your compost, that chemical that helps kill everything is now in your compost, and you don't want to use that to grow things. And then sometimes I say, like, in small amounts, it's okay to put a little bit of cheese, a little bit of yogurt that went bad into your compost. That's okay, but large amounts will be like meat where it's just smelly, it'll attract things that you don't want. Garden soil isn't bad, but garden soil is inert. It's not gonna break down. So you're really adding bulk to your bin that you don't need to add. So if you have some plants that you dug up and there's some soil on it, you know, shake off the roots, but a little bit is fine. In grass clippings, we say no to grass clippings because we really want to encourage you to leave your grass clippings on your lawn. The best thing you can do for composting your grass is letting it lie where it is. It goes right back to where it fell. It goes right back into the soil and adds great fertilizer to your lawn. Now, if you do collect your grass clippings, then you can put it in your compost. Never put wet grass clippings into your compost. If anyone's ever had a bin of grass clippings sitting out for even a week in July, you know that smell, which is horrible. That smell is nitrogen. Like that's just dense, icky nitrogen and methane coming off of that. And you don't want that in your compost. So let it dry out if you put it in. Okay. Here we go to collection from your house. So this is the next barrier, like, okay, I feel confident, I'm gonna start my compost, I'm in my kitchen, what do I do? So I'm going to show you, and I'm wondering if, can you see me okay, Kirsten?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna show you a few different compost bins. So we're gonna walk over to my kitchen. I guess I have to take off my cool forest background. Okay. It'll be my plain old house. Okay, so I'm gonna put you down. I'm gonna show you a few different kinds of bins. Maybe I won't. There we go. Oh. Okay, so there are several different kinds of bins that you can buy or just get free too. And I don't wanna overwhelm you with what kinds of bins work the best. But here are some different kinds that you might have. So here's a fancy metal one. I put my own label on it, but I'm sure you've seen these in different stores. There's holes on the top for venting. There's a charcoal filter in the top here too, and it's an easy lift off. Maybe not. Lift off. There's a charcoal filter in there, and you change out the charcoal filter. I usually do a few times a year, and you can buy them at Ace or Home Depot. They're pretty common. So great steel container. You don't have to use a bag in it. It could just be the regular bin. Here's a bin that I got to test out, and I couldn't believe that it would work because it's see-through or there's holes everywhere. So this bin is actually great if you are taking your compost to a drop-off site, because you do have to use a bag for this because obviously everything would fall out. The great thing about this bin is once you have the bag in the bin, this creates a lot of airflow and it dries out all the wet stuff. Because what happens in a lot of these other bins like this, by the time you fill it up, a lot of that wet stuff's at the bottom and it can get a little funky. But this one, because there's airflow, the liquids don't have time to, they evaporate more. So this is actually a really nice bin. You can get that online. I haven't seen it in stores. And then I've used several different kinds of bins. Like I've said, the bin that we happen to just evolve into at my house, I got for $1 at the dollar store. It was for something else, another project. And it ended up on my counter and we just kept using it. And so now this is our compost bin. I like it because it can fit in my fridge really easily. So if it starts smelling, because there might be, I haven't taken it out in a few days, or it's July, and July heat produces a few more fruit flies. I can put it right into my freezer or my refrigerator and until I empty it out. It has also been the collector of all of my produce stickers. That's kind of fun. So that reminds me of take off the produce stickers. They don't break down. They're all plastic. But here's what we use. Very simple. It could be $1. I have people that have told me they just use a bucket that they might have sitting around, or something they got at the thrift store that they just really like. You can use whatever you want. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And I have a few examples of that in the picture here too. I've used all of these and there's no winner. It's whatever works for you. So once you collect your stuff from your kitchen, you walk it out to your compost bin. So let's go to the next slide. And now this is where if you dumped your pail of wet stuff from your kitchen into your compost, add just 3 big handfuls of your browns, whether it be leaves or straw or whatever. You really want to just cover up the new stuff that you just put in to keep rodents away, but also just to layer it so that you do get that nice mixture of browns and greens. You can go to the next slide. So how do you maintain? This is where other people get lost too. I've composted in the past, but it never really worked out. I wasn't really comfortable with it. How do I know it's working? It just sits there doing nothing. Well, I can tell you as a lazy composter, you can leave it alone and it will do its job. It will, I promise. But if you want to speed things up a bit, here's how you can really do that. So you're a healthy compost pile. So use your senses. A healthy compost pile, click once, Kirsten, and there'll be that comes up. Yep, so it should be moist like a sponge, a damp sponge. So it shouldn't be completely dry. If it is, it's not gonna compost. That's really hard to do in Minnesota anyways. It's gonna be a little bit wet just because we have snow and rain, and your food adds wetness too. It should smell earthy. If it smells bad, and it just smells like garbage, that means you're putting too much wet stuff in and not enough brown. So maybe even take a week off of adding any wet stuff, put more brown stuff in, turn it a little bit and see if that smell goes away. Compost bins should never smell. And if it does, that just means you have to balance it a little more. You're not doing anything wrong. You just have to react to what it's telling you. Click the next, click once, Kirsten. And then here's my compost bin. So beautiful, isn't it? So this is looking down, and I wanted you to see this because only, I think it was 2 months ago, so like when it was still very cold out, my bin was all the way up to the top. So that's about a foot or so higher than it is in this picture. So within only 2 months, it decreased that much. Some of it's just, things breaking down, like the volume of air in the leaves have been breaking down, but composting is happening. So if you just are paying attention of like, oh, hey, it's going down, cool, I'm doing something right. Look for a lot of bugs. Some bugs are okay, but if you have a lot going on, add more browns. Try to put your wet stuff right in the middle so that bugs aren't getting to it on the sides directly. You can see in this picture too, the slats are the air holes, so bugs can get in that way too. That's fine, air needs to get in, and some bugs are actually really good. But if you have, your senses will just tell you like, this is too many bugs. So balance out, they're there for the wet stuff. So try to back off on your wet stuff or add more browns. You don't want to have any rodents, your pile should shrink over time, yes. We'll go to the next one. And I just saw the message about where do I store my leaves. I have a picture that tells you where I store them. So I will tell you that. So microbes that are in there, you'll never be able to see them. They're microorganisms. They break down and they actually provide heat. They give off heat and they do give off some carbon dioxide. They get to kill any pathogens or seeds, they need to get to 130 degrees for at least 2 weeks to kill that. You're never gonna get to that heat in your backyard compost pile. You can actually buy a compost thermometer and test the inside of your compost bin. I've done it where I've stuck my hand, like in December, I've stuck my hand in the middle of my compost pile just to see. And it's not like warm, but it's not cold. It's pretty amazing. It's a great insulator too. Next slide. Here's that timeline. So if everything worked perfectly, you could get compost within half a year, so 4 or 5 months. If you really were on it and you had everything exact and you were turning your pile, you could do it very quickly. I'm a lazy composter, like I said, so I have that bin that I just showed you is a basic bin, and I have never emptied it, but I've always kept filling it up, and so things just kind of slowly disappear, and that's been over 2 years that I've been in this house. So I wouldn't ever say that I'm finished, but things disappear. So the hot phase where those microorganisms are breaking down, they're usually breaking down a lot of the food waste. That happens in the first month. And then the cool phase where, and I say cool because it's where more of the macro invertebrates, so worms and other bugs are breaking things down more. And then everything's still breaking down and it turns into a final compost within 6 months or so. So in Minnesota, yes, in the winter, things definitely slow down because you don't have as much heat. So you usually can do pool compost once, maybe twice a year. If you have a tumbler, you can get more compost or smaller amounts, but more frequently. If that makes sense. Hopefully that answered the time question for you. Go to the next slide. Any questions here, Kirsten?
We have questions, not about the time though. Do you want me to hold on to them?
Something we've already covered.
Kind of like the yes, no list.
Sure, I can answer them.
What about chicken manure?
Nope, no manure. I know chicken manure is a little harder because it's a little bit, what I like to say is this is your own little experiment. You can try putting in a little bit and seeing if there's any smell or any change to your compost pile. If it seems like too much or it's becoming smelly, I would cut it out.
Wine corks?
Yeah, it would take a long time for them to decompose. They're pretty dense. If you broke them up, you could definitely, it would decompose. And of course, the cork ones, not the rubber plastic ones.
Yep. What about the compostable bags? If you line your container with a bag?
Yes, so certified compostable bags or any other products that are certified compostable will break down, but they take a really long time in your backyard bin because it doesn't reach the heat it doesn't have enough time to break down. So at a commercial site, they'll break down within 6 months. For yours, that bag might take up to a year. I used to use bags in my compost and it was fine. They just took longer.
I'm testing that right now. I've got one sitting out in my pile.
Okay.
Do you empty your compost every day? So I'm guessing that little pail. How often do you empty that?
That pail, no, there's only 2 people in my household. We usually empty it once a week. Of course, if I'm cooking a lot more or there's bigger stuff like, big things of broccoli or something, it'll be more.
Yep. All right, and then we have a vermicomposting question.
Yes.
Will compost worms survive winter in an outside bin?
No, they won't. So you'll need to bring them inside. They're not native to Minnesota. They can't take it because you have to have a very specific kind of worms, red wigglers, and they won't survive our winters. I have heard some places that have, like the Dodge Nature Center has big piles in their forest area and they can keep worms going throughout the winter because it's such a big pile, the worms can stay warm. I also wouldn't release them into the wild though, because they're not native and we don't want them to survive. So yeah, bring them in. I've actually killed a batch of worms that way, where I put them on a shared hallway that was connected to the outside, and it wasn't outside, but it was still cold enough and it killed the worms.
No.
Yes.
And did you talk about fruit flies? How do you manage
No,
them?
I didn't. So fruit flies are completely natural. They don't come from your compost. They come from the fruit peels. So fruit flies, not to gross you out, but fruit fly eggs are usually on our peels anyways. They're there. So whether your peels are in your trash or your compost pile or your compost bin, fruit flies are going to happen. They happen to happen more in the warmer months. So July is when I usually see a lot more fruit flies. I usually put a little jar of vinegar with so apple cider vinegar with a daub of dish soap near my compost pile, and so or compost bin in my kitchen. And then the fruit flies are attracted to the vinegar, but the dish soap breaks the surface tension, so the flies can't hover on the surface. They drown in the vinegar. So I have a fruit fly trap. Or if it's really bad, I just put my compost bin in my fridge. And it's, you know, all of a month maybe that it's an issue, and then it's fine. And I never have a fruit fly problem in the backyard where the compost pile is, because things are breaking down and they don't have a chance to do their business. And we're running out of time, so let's move on to the next one, but I'll have time for more questions too.
All right.
We're pretty much done. So when you harvest, that's the question too, like, when do I know it's ready? It should be brown, and it never just comes out magically of like everything's consistently brown. If you go to the click once, Kirsten, and I opened the sliding door of my compost just now. Again, I haven't done anything to it in 2 years. And you can see on the very bottom is what it should look like. That was all of my food waste and straw and leaves and everything, and it turned into compost. What happens is, and I don't turn my compost either. So I seriously am a lazy composter, because it'll happen, it'll break down and it's fine. So if you wanted to, when I've composted, I've taken off the whole bin, like I've lifted it up, and then kind of, it looks like a weird tower of compost because it's just a big cube. I knock it over, I take what I want from the bottom, and then put my compost bin back where it is and fill it back up again. If you click again, you can, if you're like a really on it composter and you want to sift out all of the bigger stuff, you can make your own screen or buy one. And this is just pieces of wood with some mesh screen that you can get from Ace Hardware, Menards or something. And it's just a big sift. So all of the stuff that's less than a ½ inch will fall into that wheelbarrow. And then you put everything that's on top back in your compost to break down.
Oh gosh.
So
Head.
click over.
It's got left behind. It was almost an hour. It was over.
How to use your compost, and you don't have to. Some people, like, I compost not to use my compost, but to just keep my food out of my trash. If you are composting because you're an avid gardener and you want that amazing, rich, free compost, use it, but you don't have to use it. At my last house in Colorado, I didn't empty my compost bin, I think, for 5 years. I never had an issue because it just kind of magically disappeared back into the ground. So it's fine to be lazy. You can add it to your soil. I wouldn't plant things directly into your compost because it's still decomposing a little bit. So you mix it with soil, I would say 50%, so half soil, half compost. You can add a little bit to your potting mixes and use it as mulch in the fall, especially as a weed barrier. And then next slide. I think this is a picture of my compost bin. Oh, no. Troubleshooting. So some quick troubleshooting. If there's no heat happening, so it just seems really stagnant, you need more nitrogens. So more wets. Same with slow composting. Add more nitrogens. You need to up that ratio. It smells bad, means you have too much nitrogen. So back off your wets and add more browns. You have lovely wildlife that you don't want. That means I would back off your wet stuff, your food, and then bury your food more in the middle of your bin. Also tomatoes, maybe tomatoes start sprouting from your compost bin. That means you put your anything with tomato seeds into your bin, and tomatoes are amazing at sprouting wherever they're planted. You can either take it as a cool experiment to see what happens, or you just kill the plants as they happen. If you don't want to deal with it at all, then don't put any tomatoes with seeds into your compost. Next slide. Here's my bin. So here's my setup. Here's that basic bin I talked about. And then right next to it is a metal can that I got at, I think, Home Depot. It used to be my yard waste bin that I got picked up from my garbage company. I fill that, I smush as many leaves as I can in there. And then I also have a pile nearby under a tree, so I can use that too. It's still there. So that's what I use. That's my setup. It's about 30 feet from my back door, so it's pretty easy, protected. I don't even have a lid. When I got it from the Craigslist lady, there was no lid on it, and it's fine. Works great. So if you want to turn stuff in your basic bin, you need to get a hoe or a rake. You can buy a compost turner, but I've tried them and they're not worth the money. I would just get a small rake and just to kind of turn stuff around. Think of it as a big mixing bowl. Okay, next slide is our last slide. Thank you for being patient. We're a few minutes over.
Oh, Jenny,
if-
how often would you turn?
If you, I would turn once a week if you want to really be on it and turn to add air, or just pay attention if it seems like it's slowing down or it's not decreasing. I would turn it more.
Excellent, thank you.
Just some resources, the U of M extension. Go to the next slide. It'll be our own master gardeners have some great resources too. And then if this just sounds overwhelming and you're like, no, Jenny, I am not doing this. You convinced me never to compost. That's fine. We actually have a really great free program in Dakota County where you can drop off everything I said, including meat, bones, dairy, all of that stuff that we can't compost in your backyard is accepted at an organics drop-off site. We have a site in West St. Paul at Thompson Park, Lebanon Hills in Egan, Rosemont near the dog park, Lakeville. And then if you click once more, drum roll, our newest site will be in Hastings. And we're about to launch that in June. And to sign up is really easy. You don't have to memorize this. I'll send it to you in the email tomorrow as well. But if you click again, hopefully, yeah, there it is. Easy sign up at dakotacounty.us. You can search organics and you'll find the drop-off sign up. So all of the stuff that we collect at these 5 sites are taken to a commercial compost site in Rosemont and turned into amazing compost within 6 to 9 months. It's a fabulous process. Okay, that is it. So I can take any more questions. If you need to get off because we are over an hour, please feel free to do so. You won't hurt my feelings. But I'm so happy that you came with us tonight.
Yay, thanks everyone. All right, so a few questions.
Yes.
What about moldy compost? Can you still use it?
Yeah, it shouldn't be moldy. If it's moldy, it's probably turn it more, and then it might be too damp. If something looks moldy, it's probably not mold, but the microbes that are breaking it down, it just kind of looks moldy, and it's just doing its job. That's just actually part of the process. Mold is just compost, but in our fridges.
Definitely. What about bread, rice, pasta?
Yep, that is perfectly fine. If you put a ton of it in, like if you had a whole pot of rice that went bad, I would just spread it out and make sure you have a lot of browns to dilute it.
Excellent. Somebody asked, and I'm wondering if this is about the organics drop site, if you stop off, can you get compost later?
No, we don't have any compost ability to get compost back to you. We are working on that. So people who are signed up hopefully would have a voucher or something like that. We tried to do it actually to start in April and May, but things kind of went a different direction and we didn't get to do that.
Excellent. That is it.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Kirsten, for helping.
All right.
We'll stay a minute in case there's any else. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can stop recording, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Thank you.